This seat is reserved for priority passengers. Sir, please move immediately. The flight attendant's voice sliced through the cabin like a cold wind, sharp and unyielding. Right in front of me, Susan Whitaker, a sharp-dressed woman in her mid-50s with a commanding presence and perfectly coiffed hair, pointed straight at seat 2A, where my business partner Michael sat comfortably, reviewing our presentation notes. She flashed her HOA badge like it was a badge of honor, the gold-plated emblem glinting under the cabin lights. "My son can't sit next to strangers," she snapped, her eyes fixed on Michael with clear contempt, as if he were some unwelcome intruder in her personal domain. What was supposed to be a smooth flight from New York to Chicago to close our $47 million deal with Eagle Airlines had turned into a nightmare of entitlement, veiled threats, and escalating drama. But 5 minutes later, the recording from my pocket would play for a mysterious woman, leading to the entire crew's dismissal. And Susan? She had no clue who she'd just crossed, or how her carefully constructed world of influence was about to crumble under the weight of her own arrogance. The day had started off so promising, like one of those crisp autumn mornings in the Midwest that make you feel invincible. Michael Thompson and I had built Aerotech Solutions from a modest lakeside office in a quiet Michigan town, overlooking Lake Huron, where we'd spent countless evenings brainstorming over coffee and takeout. As co-founder and lead engineer, I'd poured 3 years of my life into perfecting our advanced control systems technology that could revolutionize airline operations, making flights safer and more efficient. Michael, our sharp business mind with his easy charm and relentless drive, had negotiated the terms that would catapult us from a startup scraping by to an industry leader overnight. We'd earned those first-class seats through endless 16-hour days, surviving on sheer determination and the dream of sealing this deal. But trouble brewed even before takeoff at the bustling gate in JFK Airport. Michael's priority boarding was mysteriously revoked, a supposed technical glitch in the system. The young gate agent, barely out of her teens, looked nervous, her hands trembling as she typed furiously on her keyboard, stealing glances at a stern man in a dark suit lurking nearby, his eyes scanning the crowd like a hawk. I switched on my discreet recorder, a small device I always carried for high-stakes meetings to capture every nuance of negotiations. It was a habit born from years in the cutthroat world of tech contracts, where one misspoken word could cost millions. As we finally boarded, Michael leaned in close, his voice a low whisper amid the shuffle of passengers. "John, something's off here. That agent." The way she stared at me, it gave me chills. Like she knew something I didn't. The cabin was settling into that familiar hum of pre-flight routines overhead, bins clicking shut, seatbelts fastening when Susan Whitaker made her entrance. She strode down the aisle like she owned the plane, her expensive heels clicking authoritatively against the carpet. Trailing behind her was her 13-year-old son, Ryan, a lanky boy with downcast eyes and an air of quiet apology, nothing like the spoiled brat I'd half expected from someone like her. The entire first-class section seemed to shift in her presence. Flight attendants straightened their uniforms, passengers averted their gazes and cleared her path without a word. Even the captain, peeking out from the cockpit, gave her a nod of deference. Susan commanded the space effortlessly, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently on her designer handbag as she surveyed the seats like a general inspecting troops. When her gaze locked on Michael, something cold and calculating flickered in her eyes, a flash of recognition that sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't random entitlement. This was targeted, personal, and meticulously planned. I could feel the air thicken with unspoken tension, the kind that builds in small-town HOA meetings where one person's vendetta can upend lives. "Excuse me," she barked at the nearest flight attendant, her voice carrying the polished authority of someone used to getting her way in boardrooms and community halls alike. "My son has special needs and can't sit in his assigned seat. It's a medical necessity, and I need that gentleman." She jabbed a finger directly at Mickletoe. "Move immediately." The attendant, flustered and wide-eyed, began stammering about airline policies on seat assignments, but Susan cut her off with a dismissive wave, as if swatting away an annoying fly. "Do you see this?" She held up her gold-plated badge emblazoned with Oak Ridge Community HOA President. "I think you'll find that cooperation benefits everyone, especially those who value their jobs and livelihoods. The threat hung in the air, subtle yet unmistakable, like the undercurrent of a storm brewing over the Great Lakes. Michael's face drained of color, not the flush of irritation from a rude passenger, but a deep, haunted pallor that spoke of old wounds reopened. His hands, usually steady as a rock during tense negotiations, began to tremble slightly on his armrest. "John," he whispered urgently, "do you know her?" But before I could respond, Susan turned to us with a smile that could curdle milk, her eyes narrowing in triumph. "Hello again, Mr. Thompson. You won't escape this time." The words dripped with venom, and in that moment, everything clicked. The gate, glitch, the nervous agent, the man in the suit. This was no coincidence. It was a setup, and we were trapped 30,000 feet in the air with a woman who wielded power like a weapon. Susan didn't waste a second ramping up her assault, transforming from an overbearing passenger into a force of calculated intimidation. She cited the Americans with Disabilities Act with the precision of a seasoned lawyer, pulling out a folder of documents that looked impressively official: medical letterheads, doctor's signatures, the works. But her delivery felt too rehearsed, too smooth, like a performance she'd practiced in front of a mirror. The head flight attendant, Janet, according to her, Nemediga no-nonsense woman in her late 40s with the weary eyes of someone who'd seen every type of passenger drama, approached cautiously, trying to mediate. "Ma'am, we have protocols for seat changes, especially in first class." Susan's response was swift, her voice dropping to a measured cadence that screamed courtroom experience. Under ADA guidelines, airlines must accommodate documented conditions, and FAA regulations prioritize minor passengers' safety and comfort. She gestured toward Ryan, who stood awkwardly behind her, stealing guilty glances at Michael as if he wanted to disappear into the seat cushions. The boy mouthed silent words, his lips forming what looked like an apology he couldn't voice. What struck me as particularly insidious was how Susan wove in her connections, dropping them like breadcrumbs leading to a trap. "Perhaps I should mention," she said casually, as if commenting on the in-flight menu, "that I know your company values ties with community leaders. Several Eagle Air employees have homes in Oak Ridge, where I oversee approvals. Captain Stevens, for instance, just moved his family there last month. His wife's H-4 visa extension is still pending, such a delicate process in today's climate." The implication was clear: cross me, and lives get ruined. Janet's professional mask cracked, her eyes widening in genuine fear as she realized this wasn't about a seat. It was about leverage that extended far beyond the plane, into homes, careers, and families. As Susan's words sank in, the cabin fell into an uneasy hush, passengers shifting uncomfortably in their seats, pretending to focus on magazines or screens, but clearly eavesdropping. I watched Michael's reaction intensify at the mention of Robert Mallory, Eagle Air's vice president of procurement, a key figure in our deal. Susan leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried through the quiet space. "I spoke with Robert just yesterday about vendor relationships. He mentioned how Eagle Air streamlines contractors. Some partnerships aren't worth the hassle." Michael's face turned ashen, his fists clenching. Whatever history tied him to this woman, it was poison, and Mallory's involvement elevated the stakes to catastrophic levels. Susan scrolled through her phone's contact list with theatrical slowness, her thumb hovering over Mallory's name like a guillotine blade. "Let me just call him about this delightful coincidence. I'm sure he'll be interested in Skyer, Aerotech executives causing disruptions. Behavioral concerns do factor into evaluations, don't they?" Ryan, sensing the escalating cruelty, found his voice in a whisper that broke my heart. "I'm sorry," he said, looking straight at Michael with eyes too wise for his age. It wasn't about the seat. It was deeper, a child's regret for his mother's sins. Susan shot him a glare that silenced him instantly, but the damage was done. The cabin's sympathy was shifting. Michael finally snapped, his transformation from fearful victim to defiant survivor electrifying the air. "You want to talk, Susan? Let's talk about Oak Ridge. What you did to my family 2 years ago." His voice boomed, raw with pain, turning every head in first class. "We bought our dream home there, a beautiful colonial with a wraparound porch where my 8-year-old Sophie could ride her bike and play with neighborhood kids. But that wasn't good enough for you, was it? A successful executive and his family didn't fit your community standards. The sarcasm dripped from his words, exposing the thinly veiled bigotry behind her actions. Constant violation notices for made-up infractions, harassment about our lawn, complaints that Sophie's toys were inappropriate. You made our lives hell until we sold at a loss and fled. Susan's facade cracked, her confidence wavering. I don't know what you're implying, she stammered, but Michael was unstoppable. He pulled out his phone, dialing with deliberate calm. Lisa, remember the Oak Ridge lawsuit? The one our attorney said we should file? Yes, the FBI on HOA discrimination. What was the agent's name? Lisa's voice echoed through the speaker, audible to all. Agent Caldwell. They've built a case on systematic discrimination and money laundering. Oak Ridge is at the top. Susan's face drained of color as Michael pressed on. Tell Caldwell that Susan Whitaker just threatened Captain Stevens' family using her HOA power. That's federal witness material. The flashbacks hit Michael hard, his voice cracking as he relived the nightmare. Lisa, remember Sophie packing her room, asking why the mean lady said we didn't belong? She lost her friends, changed schools, and for months, she thought we'd done something wrong. Lisa spent time in therapy for the depression your harassment caused. Sophie still has nightmares. But you know what, Susan? Therapy taught us victims have power when we unite. Lisa, how many families contacted our lawyer? 47, with tales of harassment, discrimination, financial manipulation. The FBI says it's their biggest HOA fraud probe ever. Susan tried one last ploy, her voice pleading now. Danielle, Michael, there's been a misunderstanding. Let's discuss privately, reach an accommodation. But Michael, empowered by years of pent-up rage, replied with icy resolve. The only accommodation I want is you facing justice for ruining dozens of families. Lisa, call Caldwell. Susan's repeating her tactics on Eagle Air Flight 447. Cornered and desperate, Susan's true colors emerged in a venomous hiss that chilled the cabin. You think you're clever? 47 families, FBI probes, all impressive. But you have no idea how deep this network runs or how many rely on my success. Her eyes gleamed with malice, revealing the monster beneath the polished exterior. Oak Ridge isn't just an HOA. It's a sophisticated system for acquiring prime real estate from families who don't fit undervalued buys, premium resales. $23 million in profits over 3 years, structured through shell companies to evade detection. Community fees, assessments, mandatory contracts, it's all profitable for those in the know. And Robert Mallory? He's key, providing data on vulnerable airline staff, housing struggles, immigration statuses, financial weak points. Airlines are goldmine shy. Living costs make pilots and crew easy targets. We lure them with affordable Oak Ridge homes, then enforce violations to force sales after they've invested sweat and money. Captain Stevens is our latest example. His wife's visa issues are engineered pressure for compliance. I couldn't stay silent, probing to draw out more for the recorder. So Mallory helps target employees, but what's the bigger play? This seems risky for just property flips. Susan's laugh was brittle, like cracking ice on a frozen Michigan lake. Real estate's the foundation. Control housing for key personnel, and you influence corporate decisions on a grand scale. Your $47 million contract? It's not about system sits access to operational data, flight paths, security protocols, passenger manifests. Imagine monetizing that. Routing tweaks, screening loopholes, data sales. Profits unlimited. Mallory's embedded in 4 airlines already. Eagle Air's the crown jewel. Within 6 months, we'll tank your deal over behavioral risks and acquire Aerotech at pennies on the dollar. This time, Thompson, you lose everything. No home, no company, nowhere to hide. As if on cue, Captain Stevens emerged from the cockpit, his face drawn and pale, hurrying past as Susan taunted him sweetly about his wife's visa. One paperwork slip, and it all unravels. The tension peaked when a calm, authoritative voice cut through like a lifeline. Excuse me, but I couldn't help overhearing this riveting exchange. May I join? Elizabeth Hayes rose from seat 4B, her casual travel attire belying a presence that commanded respect. She'd blended in during boarding, unremarkable amid the crowd, but now she moved with the poise of a seasoned professional. Susan's confusion turned to irritation. This is private business, not for other passengers. Elizabeth smiled, but her eyes were steel. Actually, it concerns me deeply. She flashed a leather credential case. Elizabeth Hayes, Senior Legal Counsel for Eagle Airlines. I was hoping for a quiet flight to unwind, but your discussion demands attention. Susan blanched as Elizabeth continued. I'm intrigued by your Mallory mentions and this conspiracy. Care to elaborate? The shift was palpable. Susan's empire teetered. Elizabeth dropped the bombshell. Mallory was arrested 20 minutes ago in Atlanta. The FBI's investigated his fraud network for 8 months, over $40 million in real estate scams, security compromises. John, you mentioned recording? As counsel and FBI coordinator, I'll need it. This constitutes federal crimes: conspiracy, fraud, fair housing violations, airline interference. I handed over the device, watching Susan's terror mount. Elizabeth elaborated. Surveillance started last March after a victim, a pilot named Sarah Mitchell, came forward. My own sister perished in a crash 3 years ago from preventable security flaws, the kind your schemes enable. Lives are at stake here, not just profits. Over 300 families victimized, $150 million in damages. DOJ views it as potential domestic terrorism due to transportation threats. We've tapped your communications, every call, email, text. Plans to expand to West Coast hubs, target international staff, all documented. Ryan approached then, tears streaming, his voice steady despite the shakes. Mom, I told them everything: the fake medical papers, the hurt families, Uncle Robert's schemes. I couldn't let you destroy more lives. Susan recoiled as if struck, her world shattering. Elizabeth softened briefly toward the boy. Agent Martinez worked with you via child services. This flight was our sting agents posed as passengers, everything transmitted live to prosecutors in Chicago, Atlanta, D.C. No entrapment. You confessed voluntarily while committing crimes. Captain Stevens cooperated fully. His visa resolved weeks ago. We used the ruse to expose you. An Aerotech. We approached you 6 weeks back to act as bait, keeping negotiations normal to lure them out. Michael's relief was overwhelming, tears welling as he processed. So while I relived the trauma, you were building the case? Elizabeth nodded. Your family's bravery sparked it all. Every victim owes you. Ryan's courage sealed it. Agents, disguised among us, cuffed Susan swiftly amid her frantic screams of illegal surveillance and high-level connections. Elizabeth dismantled her. Voluntary public confessions, dozens of witnesses. Scope: 18 months of records, 200 testimonies, largest housing fraud prosecution ever. As Susan was escorted away, still ranting about shutdowns and appeals, Ryan turned to Michael, hesitant. Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry for what you did to Sophie and your family. I was scared to speak up. Michael knelt, embracing him. Kid, you're the bravest soul here. You saved hundreds. The moment healed something in both, a bridge over shared pain. 3 months later, back in our Lakeside office, the Chicago Tribune headline stared up. Federal prosecutors announced largest housing discrimination convictions in U.S. history. Susan got 25 years, no parole. Mallory 35 as the financial mastermind. Oak Ridge transformed under court-appointed management. Discriminatory rules abolished. 47 families compensated $67 million from seized assets. Michael's family repurchased their colonial. Sophie reclaiming her porch and friends, her nightmares fading. Lisa returned to design work, her spirit renewed. Eagle Air elevated Elizabeth to chief legal officer. She rolled out employee protections against housing bias and visa threats. Our contract ballooned to $89 million, implementing systems nationwide via FAA mandates, securing Aerotech's future. Captain Stevens earned FBI commendations, his family thriving in a welcoming community. Flight staff received anti-intimidation training, empowering them against future bullies. Ryan, in foster care with a nurturing family, healed through therapy, mentored by Michael and Lisa. Sophie calling him her big brother. The investigation spanned 12 cities, recovering $180 million, birthing new federal laws on HOA oversight and fair housing. Susan's boasted connections became co-defendants, imprisoned for corruption. Michael visited that afternoon, coffee in hand, his smile unburdened. Lisa's hosting Sophie's 10th birthday. Sophie insists Uncle John helps with candles. We reflected on the flight's ripple. Without your recorder, how many more families suffer in silence? But courage yours in confronting Ryan's in whistle-blowing grass-shaped systems. As sunset painted the lake, I pondered Susan's final taunt. You think you've won? She was wrong. True power lies in everyday folks refusing silence, choosing justice over fear, ensuring no one fights alone. What do you think about the violence and injustice in everyday life? Share your opinions in the comments, take a stand, and express your views. Have you faced something similar? Let's discuss.